So kind of a trying time for us. As you know, there was as you may know, there was a amendment that was introduced yesterday from the House Armed Services Committee, and it basically gives up primary jurisdiction to the shared portion of the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. So we sent out an email. I'm going to include some of the, I'm going to include the amendment in the notes so you guys can take a look at that for yourself. I'll do the same thing on Facebook for those of you who join us on Facebook. But I did want to start out with the video that was submitted a couple years ago when we started working on the Griffith Peak Trail. This is submitted by volunteer Brittany. And it's called Dirty, Sweaty, Happy. So I wanted to start there first and then come back with a brief introduction and then turn the floor over to Mr. Alan O'Neill.
On Thursday, July 26, 2018, I set off to help rebuild the Griffith Peak Trail, which has been closed since the 2013 Carpenter 1 fire. Committed to 4 days of camping in the wilderness with Friends of Nevada Wilderness and other volunteers like myself. Why do I do the things that I do? 4 days in the wilderness with hard physical labor. I don't know. Maybe I just need a break from the monotony. Maybe I just want to give back. Maybe I just want to be a part of something that's bigger than myself. Or maybe being in nature brings some type of indescribable peace. Who knows? What I do know is that despite the chilly midnight bathroom runs, the sore muscles, the hard labor, the tiring uphill hikes, I'm so glad I did it. I had a great community of people for 4 days. I saw some familiar faces and met some new ones. We stretched together, we worked hard together, we sweated together, we rested together, we laughed together, we saw new peaks together, we broke bread together, we shared stories, and we made memories. Griffith Peak Trail is definitely not finished and has a little ways to go before it is. But we did leave it a little better than we found it.
All right, so yeah, that was pretty awesome. It was so funny because no one who was out there with her on the trail knew that she was actually creating this behind the scenes documentary of one of the first hitches that we did working on the Griffith Peak Trail. So due to the pandemic, we are still attempting to finish the trail, but we're doing it right now without volunteers. We will try to invite volunteers out closer to the end of this season. But for right now, it's just our staff and AmeriCorps working on the trail, but we are back up there. And then hopefully we still hope to have the trail finished by the end of the season. So I wanted to share that with you guys because last week our trail crew went back to Griffith Peak Trail. So we did one hitch already. It was all staff and AmeriCorps, but just wanted to update you guys and let you guys know that we're back up on the mountain. Of course, with the current mahogany fire, our next hitch will be delayed, but our schedule is back and we're back up there working to bring that trail back to you guys. So, Alan, you can hit share on your end if you'd like to bring up your deck. I'm just going to go into a brief introduction, but I've stopped my share. You've started yours. All right. So my name is Shylin Campbell. We're the Friends of Nevada Wilderness, a statewide nonprofit dedicated to preserving and protecting the wildlands of Nevada, particularly wilderness. We are advocates for wilderness. We believe public lands are for all, and wilderness is the highest level of protection. And we believe that there should be at least 10% of wilderness in our state. We fought for all 70 wilderness areas. And how we complete our mission is through advocacy, educational outreach, and stewardship. So I kind of touched a little bit on the stewardship. Basically what we do is we mobilize volunteers, and we get out on the ground into these wild spaces, fixing trails, picking up trash, and working with the foreign land management agencies, federal land management agencies to get these particular tasks done. Also advocacy, as I've mentioned, every Wild Speaker series, the Desert National Wildlife Refuge is a special place to us. It's something we've been working on. If you have received email from us today, take advantage of this holiday weekend and reach out to those members of Congress. One thing that is good, I guess we could use this to our advantage, is the fact that they're on vacation. So you can go right to a voicemail. If you're worried about, any type of interaction, you'll get all voicemails this weekend. So let's try to fill those up. And finally, educational outreach. So we like to provide platforms, not just for information on wilderness, but projects going on around the valley, and any information about wild Nevada. So tonight we're going to learn about a new proposed national monument, Avi Kwa Ame. Alan taught me that, and he's going to teach us all a little bit more about this special piece of Southern Nevada and what they're doing to try to get this protected permanently. Go ahead, sir.
You gotta unmute, Alan.
Yes, sir.
You gotta unmute.
There you go.
I got it. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, let me give you a little bit of my background. I most of my career was with the National Park Service. My last 13 years was as superintendent of Lake Mead National Recreation Area. And when I retired from Lake Mead, that was in 2000, I started the Outside Las Vegas Foundation, which now has been rebranding Get Outdoors Nevada. And I'm sure many of you are aware of that organization. But part of my work at Lake Mead, when the California Desert Protection Act was passed in 1994, the National Park Service assigned me as the coordinator on behalf of the National Park Service, and there was another gentleman from the BLM. The two of us were charged with implementing the California Desert Protection Act, and which was, I think, still today the largest piece of conservation legislation. At one time, we had 36 work groups out there trying to do the various implementation tasks, but also as part of that, I was assigned as the first superintendent of Mojave National Preserve, which was one of the units established by the act. So I was doing that while I was still at Lake Mead. The point is that I've had a long history with this particular landscape that we're talking about for the National Monument, and I've been concerned about that landscape for a long time, and how do we go about protecting that. So what we're focusing on today is talking about Avi Kwa Ame, which is the Mojave name for Spirit Mountain. And it's a proposal to establish a monument on roughly 383,000 acres of public land. If you haven't been down there and such, these lands really contain some of the most visually stunning and biologically diverse and culturally significant lands, I think, in the entire Mojave Desert. So we've had a coalition of tribes conservation organizations and recreation interests and some others, and working on this monument proposal. The organization, it's been amazing, the coalition that's come together, folks like the Friends of Nevada Wilderness, the Wilderness Society, Conservation Lands Foundation, the National Parks Conservation Association, Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, Get Outdoors Nevada, and we have the Friends of Sloan Canyon, the Friends of Walking Box Ranch, Protectors of Tule Springs, and others. Just to say that we got a pretty large coalition that is getting behind the concept of establishing this as a national monument. What really prompted the more recent efforts was 2 large wind farms that were proposed for this general area. The first was a Searchlight wind farm, which was actually defeated in court by a couple folks. And the more problematic of the wind projects was the Crescent Peak Wind Project, which finally, after fighting it for many years, BLM canceled that project in December of 2018, I guess it was. The Crescent Peak Wind Project would have wreaked havoc on this particular area, as it talked about up to 220 wind turbines, over 500 feet tall, and about 22 miles of that incredible border area between California and Nevada would be full of these towers. And the towers are bad enough visually, but the impact of constructing that, they're talking about 95 miles of new road, 36 feet in width, and then taking about 16 miles of existing road and expanding them to 36 feet. So, and all the other transmission facilities and buildings that are associated with that would transform what is now a pretty intact environment to an industrial, you'd have this industrial complex surrounded by these conservation lands. So that really prompted us to look at different ways of providing permanent protection for that area. Okay. So the roughly 385,000 acres, it would protect an expanse of that East Mojave Desert that would provide continuity to other parts of the East Mojave Desert that's already protected on the California side. So California's done a good job on that East Mojave system by establishing the Mojave National Preserve, the Castle Mountains National Monument, and the Mojave Trails National Monument, along with the Dead Mountains Wilderness Area. So that entire California side of the border has protected areas. Well, not much has been done on the Nevada side at all with except the establishment of the Wheat Thump Wilderness Area and the South McCullough Wilderness Areas, and the designation of this area is an ACEC, but this was mainly designated ACEC to protect the desert tortoise. That ACEC is Area Critical Environmental Concern. So this monument connects all that work that's been done in California all the way over to Lake Mead National Recreation Area. So it provides that contiguous block of habitat, which is a sufficient quality and quantity that actually will promote the survival, growth, reproduction, and maintenance of viable populations of our Mojave Desert flora and fauna. So there's a couple paths that we were looking at in terms of moving this legislation. One was a piece of standalone legislation, which right now looks like probably the most probable. The other was to include this in the Clark County Public Lands Bill, which is actually called the Southern Nevada Economic Development and Conservation Act. But there's a lot of concern with that piece of legislation in terms of expanding the disposal boundary in the Las Vegas Valley. And along with that, bringing additional sprawl and stuff. So some of the conservation organizations are concerned about that. And so that, you know, is right now not moving quickly, but is a possibility. So we're looking at both options in terms of how we might move a national monument proposal forward. What is a national monument? A national monument provides a permanent designation for public land, generally established by Congress, and to protect those important values, whether it be recreation, natural, cultural resources, visual resources, or the dark night sky or natural quiet, while they preventing inappropriate large-scale industrial development of those public lands. As I mentioned, monuments can be established also through presidential executive order under the Antiquities Act of 1906. And we have recent examples of that. That's how the Gold Butte National Monument was established, as well as the Basin and Range National Monument in Nevada, and the Castle Mountains National Monument and the Mojave Trails National Monument in California. So these were all established by President Obama under the authority of the Antiquities Act. So that's always a possibility. Now, in terms of management, I look at monuments are managed pretty much like most units of the National Park Service and units within the BLM conservation lands that are entitled National Conservation Areas, where the purpose of that is to protect those values. And while protecting them, also provide for the public's enjoyment of those. So the monument is pretty aligned with those designations, except the monument does give us a little more flexibility to deal with some of the realities of this particular landscape. Here's a map. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
The area, the blue obviously is a monument, but if you see these blank spots here that have no cross-hatching, these were all lands that have no designation, and these were the lands subject to the Crescent Peak Wind Project. As you can see, that would create an island basically surrounded by protected land. So that's why there was so much concern about that particular project. So you can see the monument also includes South McCullough Wilderness, the Weethump Wilderness area, and a little piece of the Spirit Mountain Wilderness area. The reason for including those already designated areas was principally the importance of managing this as an integrated ecological and cultural landscape. And you say, well, it's a good part of that, 270,000 acres, is already designated an ACEC. Why do you need a national monument? Well, the ACEC here was established primarily to protect the desert tortoise. It didn't deal with the need to protect migratory corridors for bighorn sheep. Obviously had no protection for the cultural resources here, which is important as the ecological values are here. It's, the cultural values may even be more important. So the monument deals with more holistically in terms of how this area would be protected and managed.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So Spirit Mountain itself is in the southeast corner, right? Where it says Spirit Mountain Wilderness.
Yes.
That's where Spirit Mountain is, and that's already wilderness, right? So the mountain itself is okay.
Yeah, you have the three wilderness areas there, but this piece here has no protection. And this is the part of it's still, you're on the beginning flanks of Spirit Mountain here. So although a majority of Spirit Mountain is within Lake Mead National Recreation Area, there's a need to protect the part that's on the BLM part that doesn't have protection. Plus, if you're up on Spirit Mountain, the viewscape, you can see almost everything within the monument. So the native folks, it's important to them to have the viewscape from Spirit Mountain protected, because all these lands have important cultural values, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. So, and you might ask, well, how did you determine the boundaries? We first started with an ecological overlay, and that was developed working with the Nature Conservancy and their eco-regional planning work, which they've done extensive work over the last several decades, because that assessment provided us a really rigorous, scientifically sound basis for determining where the highest overall ecological values intersect. So, and that's what we were interested in. Where do all these intersect? If we're going to draw a line, where might that line be? And can we defend it when people say, well, why did you put the boundary there? And that's the reason why we wanted to go with that process. I think you all realize that conserving those connections between species preferred habitat does allow some individual movement and multi-generational dispersal. And that increases our long-term species viability. Because most of the land within the proposed monument are relatively undisturbed and connect, as you saw, to other protected lands. The monument offers the opportunity to provide species and communities with some space and interconnectedness they may need to help adapt to climate change. And maintaining that landscape integrity across the elevational gradient, because we go to the ridge lines in those transition zones, that increases the ecosystem's resilience to long-term environmental changes, such as temperature and precipitation levels. And you can see here, as you're going through, you can see how scenic this area, this particular area here is Hyco Springs Canyon, which is a very special area. And the one on the left is the piece of the Piute Range that's on the Nevada side of that border. There's really no difference between the habitat on the California side and the Nevada side. In fact, in some instances, the habitat on the Nevada side is better than that on the California side. It just hasn't been given the same level of attention as they have in California. The cultural overlay, which is a little trickier, was developed working with the Fort Mojave Indian tribe. Now, the Fort Mojave tribe serves as a steward for Spirit Mountain and that surrounding cultural landscape on behalf of the other human tribes. Now, there's 9 associated human tribes, and Mojave, the Hualapai, the Yavapai, the Havasupai, the Kashan, the Maricopa, Pai, and others. And so it's in terms of the human tribes, it's acknowledged as the most sacred place in the universe for them. All those tribes track their origin to this really sacred place. And today, the mountain and surrounding landscape continue to serve as a sacred and ceremonial place for these tribes. That landscape, and I'm saying not just the mountain, it's the entire landscape, is critical to the religious traditional lifeways and practices of these human-speaking tribes. In addition to the human-speaking tribes, the landscape was also important to the Hopi and the Chemehuevi Paiute. So based on these two overlays, the ecological overlay and a cultural overlay, we define that proposed boundary. Now, obviously, that boundary can be adjusted. It's not cast in stone. We think it's a good boundary, but as issues arrive, that boundary could be adjusted somewhat. Now, let's talk about the features of the monument. I might, in terms of the ecological, we'll start with, you know, the monument forms that eastern terminus of what the folks from the National Parks Conservation Association say is the world's largest Joshua tree forest. So it is home to some of the oldest and largest Joshua trees on the planet. If you look over on the left here, some of you may know Jocelyn Torres. This is her standing under what we think, and are going to have it until the coronavirus hit us. We're going to have that measured by the state Nevada Department of Forestry. We think it's the largest Joshua tree in the state of Nevada. So it's an extensive Joshua tree forest and very healthy, quite healthier, say, than some of the Joshua trees in the western Mojave Desert, say in Joshua Tree National Park even. So in terms of our plants and unique grasslands, this really is a hot spot of biological diversity. We don't have an exact figure on the number of rare and sensitive species, but it's at least several dozen. But what really is kind of special here, you don't find in many places in the desert, are the number of native grass species. And there's some 28 different species of native grasses. About half of those are rare. But it also contains a large subtropical grasslands. And you normally find this in the Sonoran desert uplands in Arizona and Mexico. So if you look at this picture here, look how dense that. I mean, when you look at the understory of other places in the Mojave Desert and look at the density of this grasslands, it's very special. Desert tortoise contains the largest area of high quality tortoise habitat in Nevada. And most folks think it's probably the highest desert tortoise population densities too. And additionally, it's contiguous with a large high density population of tortoise in California. Now, bighorn sheep, the monument does serve as an important migratory corridor for desert bighorn sheep. They do move between the mountain ranges, the Piute Mountains, the New York Mountains, the McCulloughs, and east to the Newberry and El Dorado Mountains. So protecting those corridors is important. Now, those interested in birding, this whole area is designated as an important birding area by Audubon. Obviously, it's important for migratory birds because of its proximity to foraging and habitat and nesting habitat, and of course to the Colorado River, which is one of the most significant flyways, features in the Pacific Flyway. What we found though is that the area does have also a unique Sonoran bird population, a little more typical of Arizona, gilded. I'm not a birder myself, so I can't speak with any expertise on it, but those who I've talked to, they've seen gilded flickers and Harris hawks, and maybe even a possible resident population of curved-billed thrashers. Now, golden eagles and raptors, it's one of the highest known density of golden eagles in Nevada. And there's a large raptor population. State Department of Wildlife said there's probably 18 species of raptors in this area. About 10 of those, I think, are on their conservation target species for conservation in their wildlife action plan. So it is a very important area for birding. Gila Monsters, I've only seen one out there, but they are out there. Generally, the elevation's up to about 4,300 feet. So this is important habitat for them. There are a number of important water sources here. There's also a number of water guzzler systems that have been put in over the years, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this designated a monument, because we think the retention of those guzzlers is probably the right thing to do. And so we have, I've been up to Pipe Springs and Hyco Springs and Granite Springs, and there's some other springs here, but water is important. These spring sources are really important in the monument area. In terms of geology, fascinating geology in the monument. You've got the volcanic highland range, you've got the Castle Mountains, the Nevada side of the Castle Mountains, and the Nevada side of the Piute Range, the Dead Mountains to the south. One of the areas that's fascinated me, being out in the field, poking around a lot during the coronavirus shutdown, is the Highland Range. I had no idea. I saw that driving down 95 there and thought, well, that looks kind of interesting, kind of a rugged sawtooth view to it, but I'd never actually been in there. So I went in there. There's a road that follows a transmission line, about 2.5 miles off of 95 in there, then a transmission line corridor that heads south that you can follow. And there's actually 6 different backcountry roads that access that. I really couldn't believe what was back there when I got there. I mean, it shocked me the beauty and diversity of the habitat there, because as you enter in there, and you've got that creosote birdsage type of habitat. But as you get into the Highland Range, it's much more diverse. There's a number of scenic canyons. I mentioned the Hyco Springs, but there's other canyon areas here as well. Now, let's talk about the cultural resources, because this may be new to some of you. As I mentioned earlier, as important as this area is ecologically, it's equally significant as a cultural landscape. You know, the area is kind of, I call it a living laboratory, which kind of showcases that progression of human history in the eastern Mojave Desert. We call it the crossroads of the American West, because it represents all those things that happen as the population moved west and the West was settled. This is Spirit Mountain, as you can see here. This, looking from the south, this is the Castle Mountains, that part that's on the Nevada side of the border, and these are some petroglyph panels down at Hyco Springs Canyon. These are the Castle Mountains, Castle Peaks. Now, the Castle Peaks are actually in the Mojave National Preserve, but the boundary would say would be right in here. This would be the Nevada-California border. So much of the view of the Castle Peaks is from the Nevada side. As I said, almost the entire monument is within that view shed of Spirit Mountain and considered sacred by those 9 human-speaking tribes. It's tied to their creation, their cosmology, and well-being. They keep emphasizing that to us. And again, that landscape's also a sacred area to the Hopi and Chemehuevi Paiute. Avi Kwa Ame is a center of the human tribe's creation, and it figures predominantly within their spiritual ideology. In their worldview, that's where they emerge from one dimension into the earth dimension. And that's why it's so important. The whole monument really is physically and spiritually connected to the viewshed and landscapes that surround Avi Kwa Ame. Of course, the tribes believe that this connection is through the mountain peaks and ranges that surround Avi Kwa Ame. And they say that the physical network of trails and cultural sites, which we consider tangible cultural resources, and the corresponding bird songs and creation stories, which are the intangible cultural resources, link their tribes and religious traditions to this important landscape. And I mentioned that Spirit Mountain is designated as a traditional cultural property, and it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. When I was at Lake Mead, we went through that process for almost 3 years with all the tribes. There were over a dozen tribes involved in that process. And this was not an easy thing to do because the tribes don't believe in setting boundaries. Boundaries is kind of a European or idea, you know, in their worldview, you know, you don't put boundaries there. But you know, we finally got through to them that we really needed to establish a boundary in order to get it on the National Register and for the National Park Service, in our sense, to change our whole management. Realizing that when you're looking at federal management, managing for sacred values was kind of a new thing to federal land management when the Historic Preservation Act was revised to add this new category. And we had to do a lot of deep thinking and consultation with the tribes to find out, well, what would that mean for that Spirit Mountain area on the Lake Mead National Recreation Area side? And quite frankly, we changed our management pretty substantially to honor the tribe's concerns and the sacredness of that area. But when we were doing that, it was kind of an unspoken commitment that we made to the tribes. That's why I personally feel so committed to protecting this through the monument, is that we would revisit that issue at a later time. And this is that later time when we can look at not just preserving the mountain. The mountain is a mountain, but the landscape surrounding that needed protection. And that's why we've spent so much time working with them to see if that boundary, how that ecological boundary lined up with their cultural concerns. It really lined up fairly well, with some exceptions. The Dead Mountains to the south, a lot of people aren't that familiar with the Dead Mountains, but that's also considered to be sacred to the human tribes. And those mountains contain both sacred and ritual importance. They're associated with their traditional cosmogony, their religious events, their religious figures, and some burial places. So that's why we moved the boundary south. Some of that was not because of the ecological things, although there were some, but mostly south of 163, which is that Laughlin Cutoff Road, principally because of cultural values. Now, on the California side, those Dead Mountains have been protected with wilderness designation, but the Nevada side is not protected. And Granite Springs, which is one of their most sacred places, is on that Nevada side and has no protection. You can see here's a view from the Colorado River Valley from the Dead Mountains. Here's the Dead Mountains looking south, what we call the gasoline line road. interesting, there's a whole kind of complex of these teddy bear cholla. Here's actually the Granite Springs, number of petroglyphs on these rocks in the Granite Springs area. Now, the Walking Box Ranch is within the monument. And some of you may be familiar with that, but that has really a colorful history. Colorful history as it relates to early grazing around the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s. The Rock Springs Land and Cattle Company started moving some of their cattle that were on the California side into Nevada. They actually had a grazing lease that was almost 1 million acres, if I recall, all the way from around Railroad Pass down to the Laughlin area. And I don't know the number of cattle that were grazed in those early 1900s, but there was a drought period of 2 or 3 years that really caused some financial woes to the company, and so they moved on out of Nevada and transferred the property to someone who they knew, and I can't remember his name, but the real interesting part of the history after that was when Rex Bell bought the property, the Walking Box Ranch, in 1931. And he and Clara Bow were married and bought this property as a retreat from Hollywood. Clara Bow, I don't think that we have any movie star today that had the same level of stardom that she had in the late 20s and early 30s. She was the it girl. She was incredibly famous worldwide. She not only did silent movies, but also did voice movies when they came around. And Rex Bell was a cowboy star in some of the cowboy movies of the time. So when they moved and bought this property, they kind of opened that up to the Hollywood elite, if you will. So they like to throw parties out there. People would take the train, the Hollywood folks would take the Union Pacific Railroad out to Nipton, get on there and get in cars and go out to the ranch. You can imagine how remote that was back in 1931 and the 30s. You know, people like Clark Gable and Carol Lombard and Errol Flynn, Lionel Barrymore, John Wayne. These are the types of characters that spent time out at the Walking Box Ranch. So it does have a fascinating tie to the movie industry, and particularly the development of Western movies and such. So that tie in history to the movie business is pretty important. Now, Rex and Claire stayed there for about 20 years after they bought it, and finally they divorced, and Rex Bell sold that in 1951, and he then moved on to be lieutenant governor of Nevada. The property, after he sold it, changed hands several times, and the Nature Conservancy actually bought that in the 1990s and held it for a while, and then sold it to BLM in 2004. In fact, this was, I believe, the first acquisition under the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act. So that was an important acquisition for BLM to make. And there's been some cultural restoration work done out on the main building, which was, let's see, this is the main building here. It was a little over 5,000 acres, 5,000 square feet. There was a barn, there was other outbuildings and such, but the main building, it had a swimming pool, it had a tennis court at the time, but much of the cultural restoration work has been done there. And this is a new sign that BLM has put in there. And our hope is to have tours out there in the very near future. We've helped form a group called the Friends of Walking Box Ranch, which would be the nonprofit partner to BLM in this case to help BLM provide educational programming and support for enhancing the visitor experience there. The historic Mojave Trail or road, some of you may be familiar with that, but the Mojave Trail itself goes back to hundreds of years. The Mojave used that trail, not only Mojave, but other tribes used that trail to trade from the Southwest to the Chumash and other tribes on the California coast. So that was a major trade route back in the early days. And of course, over time, it's been used for various purposes as a route toward the Western expansion and such, to 1960s, for example, the road served both civilian and military mail carriers and supply wagons between the Arizona Territory and California. Today, you can still take the Mojave Road, backcountry road. About 138 miles of it are really look much like it must have 100 years ago. So that's quite an interesting experience. I haven't taken the Mojave Road completely. I've taken sections, but that's a kind of a popular activity for backcountry users.
I'm planning a Sierra Club trip along the Mojave Road in October.
Oh, wow. That's great. Piute Springs and Fort Piute are actually on Mojave National Preserve, but the access is partly through the monument lands. And this was one of the series of forts that were set up to defend the territory for people that are using the Mojave Road and such at that time. Small fort, but very interesting to visit. Number of petroglyphs there too. The Garcias Expedition was a lot earlier. That was 1775, where Garcias, he was a priest and explorer, and he was trying to open up a land route between what was then the missions of Sonora, which that's present day Arizona, really around the Tucson area. They were looking for a route west, and they stumbled into the Mojave settlement there, what is now Fort Mojave, and they got guided westward along that road by members of the Mojave tribe. Garcias was the first, I believe, the first European to enter Nevada, from what we know. I may be wrong in that, but literature I've read, he was the first. Another interesting thing was the Army Camel Corps. You hear about that occasionally. The joke was, anyone seen a lost camel out there? But that operated for a short period from 1955 to 66. Jefferson Davis, who was then Secretary of War, that was before the Civil War started. He was Secretary of the War and was fascinated by camels and their potential ability to carry supplies, transport supplies and weaponry out west to protect the forts and such. And so they got 75 camels from Egypt and transported them by ship and And they were put into use for those period of years. And then the Civil War hit, and of course Jefferson Davis was head of the Confederacy, and since those camels were kept in Arizona, they became the property of the Confederacy, and during wartime, they were not really used that much. So after the Civil War, there wasn't much interest in that. And of course, we also had steamships and railroad coming west. So the experiment, as I understand it, is the camels actually were more effective than horses in most cases. They required less food, less water, and could carry heavier loads than horses and mules. But I guess we never will know for sure if that would have been successful over time, but people say that that was a successful adventure. So, you know, there is a lot of colorful history here. And in terms of the recreational resource, I've come to learn a lot about that. There's a wonderful network of trails and roads for backcountry access to various points of interest here. I wrote up personally 13 suggested backcountry scenic routes that people could take to access some of the monument sites. You'll be able to access them on our new website, which I think maybe went public today. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. But there are tremendous backcountry roads there in terms of accessing really the principal sites in the area. Hunting, the area does provide hunting opportunities for desert bighorn sheep. There are some deer hunting and for smaller game animals. The viewscape is what I think are just remarkable in this area. As I said, almost everywhere in the monument, except maybe the furthest north part, you can see Spirit Mountain or the Castle Mountains or the Castle Peaks. The Highland Range and South McCullough Ranges you can see from the northern section, and the Dead Mountains from the southern section. Also, the whole, as many of you know, the whole idea of dark night sky and natural quiet are the evolution of those concepts as important resources has expanded a lot in the last decade. And this area is excellent for both dark night sky and natural quiet. So these are increasingly valuable resources. So what are the goals to be achieved by this proposed new national monument? Obviously, we want to protect existing recreational resources such as hunting, hiking, and the OHV used in backcountry driving on existing designated roads and trails. And of course, camping and all the other recreational activities. We want to protect the critical migratory corridors for bighorn sheep that sustain a healthy population of wildlife necessary for hunting and recreation. Obviously, you want to protect the native plants and wildlife, including the federal, state, and county protected species, which I said there's over 24. And protecting those sacred American cultural sites and values. It's taken me a while I've been out with some of the elders trying to understand how they view the landscape. It's been quite an education for me. I can't articulate that in the way they can, but I do have a deep appreciation for the values and where the tribes are coming from. Now, we will honor existing mining claims within the boundary, but not allow any new claims, including oil and gas leasing. We want to protect that viewscape and the socioeconomic and rural character. The point we're trying to make to the Searchlight residents is that they didn't like this Crescent Peak Wind Project, and you know, they moved there because of the rural lifestyle. So, you know, you don't see too much of that in southern Nevada. So protecting that rural lifestyle is one of the things we think is important. There are some health issues here. There are some naturally occurring asbestos. You may have read, there's been a couple articles in the paper last year about high levels of naturally occurring asbestos. And plus, the fungi, the source of valley fever. That was one of the concerns we had with all the construction activity, new roads and such up there, what impact that would have on releasing this fungus and those that naturally occurring asbestos. So you can see the great vistas we have here. Occasionally you'll get snow. A picture I took after a snowstorm. Desert beautiful after a snowstorm. These are the Piute range here. Some people say, well, how would this impact the economics, in the communities like Laughlin and Searchlight? They're concerned about their economic well-being. Laughlin in particular, because you may have read that, one of their large casinos closed. This was even before the coronavirus. And they're getting low occupancy in those hotels prior to the coronavirus. So there's a real concern about economics there. But a lot of the literature would say that, that national monuments actually help nearby communities.
Yeah. Alamo, for example.
What's that?
In Alamo, the motels there,
yeah,
they've really, got a lot more business, including Sierra Club,
Yeah. Well, look what's happened to Moab,
Jim Boone. Yeah. Yeah. What, Moab? Sorry?
Yeah. Moab was a sleepy uranium town until, the outdoor enthusiasts found it. And you can,
yeah.
maybe it's overused, but it certainly changed the economics of Moab and the area around Moab. So the study done by Headwaters Economics analyzed the economies surrounding 17 national monuments in 11 Western continental states. They were those larger monuments, over 10,000 acres. So the study found that no evidence that designating these national monuments prevented economic growth. Instead, trends in key economic indicators such as population, employment, personal income, and per capita income increased after the monuments were established. So, it's at least been my observation in today's economy, the greatest value of natural amenities and recreational opportunities often lies in the ability of these protected lands to attract and retain people, entrepreneurs, their businesses, and the growing number of retirees who locate for quality of life reasons. As you know, Get Outdoors Nevada started the Nevada Outdoor Business Coalition to bring greater focus into, wait a minute now, this is an important business. This outdoor business is important to our economy in Nevada. And this is my last slide. So that industry is a strong and growing sector. It contributes in Nevada about $12.6 billion in consumer spending and about 87,000 jobs. We don't think of that. $4 billion in wages and salaries, $1.1 billion in state and local tax revenue. And outdoor recreation actually ranks third in jobs sustained in Nevada, behind only gaming and tourism and healthcare. And you can say that part of this outdoor recreation also could claim part of the tourism thing. So, this is ahead of things that we think of that maybe hire more people statewide. So a substantial number of Nevada small business owners and I've attended several of the coalition meetings, choose to do business in the state because of opportunities tied to the public lands. So, you know, this was from a poll by the small business majority. So I thought it was instructive to think that 42% of those polled agreed that when choosing where to live or own a business, access to outdoor recreational opportunities provided by parks and public lands was a large factor. And that same poll found that 59% of small business owners believe the new national parks and monuments would help the state attract and retain entrepreneurs and new businesses. And 53% feel it would help Nevada attract and retain high quality workers. So that's kind of the end of the PowerPoint, but I want to just mention that we do have a website that will be up, and you can either get it to honoravikwame.org or honorspiritmountain.org. And the Facebook site is www.facebook.com/honorspiritmountain. And also there's an Instagram site too, www.instagram.com/honorspiritmountain. So are there questions?
I have a question. This is Hermie. Will the map be available on the website?
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
Good. And
Yeah.
thanks for the presentation. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. You can see this, I love this. So this was the gathering of tribes here, and look at their banners: honor, respect, protect. So,
Hey, Alan, I like your, the way you did the slides, because you don't just have bullets. If somebody went back in and wanted to look at the slideshow, they can get information from it. I
Yeah.
really like that style, and excellent photographs.
Thank you. I have thousands, maybe 10,000 monument area. So if anybody wants photographs.
I know, I've got one on my wall over there. I bought it.
It's funny because, I've driven down that landscape so many times and went past sites that I didn't even know existed. I should know better. So, people just don't know where to go. And we saw that during the shutdown, people, look at Mount Charleston, the pressure there, and, that just, people weren't sure where to go. They were puzzled because where they usually go was shut down. Even Lake Mead, I had to find some obscure backcountry roads to enjoy the experience. But at the same time, it showed me roads I had no idea existed. So that was a plus, and I was so excited to find those because it just made that landscape on the monument, to me, much more diverse and interesting.
Joy Lane, yes, this was recorded over on Facebook, and we'll also be uploading to YouTube later. But if you check out our Facebook page, you can scroll back to the beginning and watch it over or share it with friends.
Yeah. Do you want the PowerPoint?
I don't know where I would put it. It's not like I can upload it to Facebook.
I feel like it's put it on our website or something. Okay, folks, thanks for tuning in the night before a 3-day weekend. So
yes,
yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
And thank you for being our speaker today.
You bet.
Does anyone else have any questions? Because if not, definitely would like everyone to get their 3-day weekend started without further delay. So
Thank you.
I'm going to refresh Facebook, see if there's any last minute questions. There was a comment from Zane Moore who offered to help you with a professional measurement of that tree. So
Oh, what?
the measurement of the tree that you were talking about.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
I'm going to
Okay.
ask that person to DM
Thank you.
each so we can get your email and maybe do that later.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yes, again, thanks,
Yeah.
Alan.
Enjoy.
It was
Thanks a
awesome.
lot.
Eileen,
Thank
for
you, Alan.
organizing.
Great.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You guys have a great weekend. No
Okay.
fireworks.
Bye.
Great job, Alan.
Bye-bye.
Great job. We loved it.
Thanks.
See ya.
Thank you.